Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as a supreme being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Announcements by the President.
Honourable Senators, I have granted leave of absence to Senator the Honourable Dr. Amory Brown, Senator the Honourable Paula Gopeesingh, Senator Wade Mark, and Senator Damian Lyder, all of whom are out of the country, and to Senator Dr. Maria Dillon Remy, who is ill. Honourable Senators, I have received the following correspondence from Her Excellency the President, Paula May Weeks, ORTT. The Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, by Her Excellency Christine Kangaloo, Acting President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. To Mr. Michael Seals, whereas Senator the Honourable Paula Gopeesingh is incapable of performing her duties as a senator by reason of her absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Christine Kangaloo, Acting President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, do hereby appoint you, Michael Seals, to be a member of this Senate temporarily, with effect from the 29th of November 2022, and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of Senator the Honourable Paula Gopeesingh. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President St. Anne's this 24th day of November 2022. To Mr. Dominic Smith, whereas Senator Wade Mark is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Paula May Weeks, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(b) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Leader of the Opposition, do hereby appoint you, Dominic Smith, to be a member of the Senate temporarily, with effect from the 29th of November 2022, and continuing during the absence of Senator Wade Mark by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President St. Anne's this 29th day of November 2022. By Her Excellency Paula May Weeks, ORTT, President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. To Dr. Tim Gopeesingh, whereas Senator Damian Lyder is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Paula May Weeks, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(b) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Leader of the Opposition, do hereby appoint you, Dr. Tim Gopeesingh, to be a member of the Senate temporarily, with effect from the 29th of November 2022, and continuing during the absence of Senator Damian Lyder by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President St. Anne's this 29th day of November 2022. To Mr. Josh Drayton, whereas Senator Dr. Maria Dillon Remy is incapable of performing her duties as a senator by reason of illness, now therefore I, Paula May Weeks, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(b) and Section 44(4)(c) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Josh Drayton, to be a member of the Senate temporarily with effect from the 29th of November 2022 and continuing during the absence of Senator Dr. Maria Dillon Remy by reason of illness. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President St. Anne's this 28th day of November 2022. Honorable Senators, by Her Excellency Christine Kangaloo, Acting President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, to Mr. Ndale Young. Whereas Senator the Honorable Dr. Amory Brown is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Christine Kangaloo, Acting President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, do hereby appoint you, Ndale Young, to be a member of the Senate temporarily, with effect from the 29th of November 2022, and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator the Honorable Dr. Amory Brown. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President St. Anne's, this 24th day of November 2022. Honorable Senators are required to take the oath.
I, Ndale Young, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do solemnly affirm that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, upon which I am about to enter.
I, Michael Seals, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibility to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, upon which I am about to enter.
I, Tim Gopeesingh, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by the Bhagavad Gita that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, upon which I am about to enter.
I, Dominic Smith, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, upon which I am about to enter.
I, Josh Drayton, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
Papers.
Acting Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, on behalf of the Minister of Works and Transport, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper in his name. The Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Extension of Period for Payment of 50% of Fixed Penalty Number 3, Order 2022.
Acting Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper in the names of the Minister of Trade and Industry, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Labour, and the Minister of Planning and Development. The annual administrative report of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards for the period 2018-2019. The reports of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago with respect to the progress of the proposals to restructure CLICO, BAT, and CIB for the quarters ended December 31st, 2021 and March 31st, 2022. The annual administrative reports and audited financial statements of the National Helicopter Services Limited for the financial years ended September 30th, 2017 and 2018. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Police Complaints Authority for the year ended September 30th, 2021. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Trinidad and Tobago Racing Authority for the year ended July 31st, 2012. The annual administrative reports of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee for the periods February 2012 to September 2012, October 2013 to February 2014, and October 2017 to September 2018. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Labour to the third report of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration on an inquiry into the impact of work from home and alternative work arrangements, policies, and initiatives on public sector productivity and service delivery. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Planning and Development to the fourth report of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs on an inquiry into the efficiency and effectiveness of the Central Statistical Office. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Planning and Development to the third report of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration on an inquiry into the impact of work from home and alternative work arrangements, policies, and initiatives on public sector productivity and service delivery.
Reports from committees.
Senator John.
Madam President, I have the honor to present the following reports as listed on the order paper in my name. The sixth report of the Public Accounts Committee on an examination of the audited financial statements of the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial years 2014 to 2020. The seventh report of the Public Accounts Committee on an examination of the audited financial statements of the Trinidad and Tobago Securities and Exchange Commission for the financial years 2014 to 2018. The eighth report of the Public Accounts Committee on an examination of the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial years 2021. The ninth report of the Public Accounts Committee on an examination of the administration of CAPE Scholarship Program as reported on in the Special Audit Report within the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year 2019.
Questions on notice? Questions for oral answer?
Acting Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, there are 3 questions that qualify for oral answer. Government is prepared to answer all.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 13 to the Honorable Attorney General.
Madam President, no legal fees were paid to Marie de Vere Chambers for the period in question. This is because Marie de Vere Chambers was never a legal firm and has never billed clients nor received legal fees. Paragraphs 2 and 3 of the question are therefore not applicable.
Thank you, Madam President. No further answer if that is the case.
Next.
Further questions, sir.
Sure. Next question, Senator John.
Madam President, question number 14 to the Minister of Public Utilities.
Minister of Public Utilities.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, TSTT has advised that on March the 13th, 2022, the company IT security system detected a malware incursion, which was directed at a number of the company's internal-only solutions and/or applications. Following this discovery, a team was immediately set up comprising international cybersecurity experts, and a comprehensive investigation was launched to determine the root cause of the incursion, ascertain the full impact of the incident, as well as to contain the problem and identify possible mitigations against the recurrence of a similar incident. TSTT has further advised that the investigation revealed that no customer, employee, critical company, or public cloud data had been compromised due to the stringent cybersecurity measures that were already in place. The company has advised, however, that the malware intrusion did negatively affect the company's revenue collection ability over the period March the 13th to the 20th, 2022. And because of the point-of-sale system in use at partner B-Mobile retail locations. The online payment application from TSTT's website had to be isolated. Therefore, as a precautionary measure, and as a result, TSTT was unable to process payment transactions via this platform during the specified period. However, customers were still able to make payments via bank transfer, SurePay, Western Union, NLCB Via, and the B-Mobile application.
Senator John.
Yes. Madam, can the Honourable Minister tell us whether TSTT is satisfied that all of the customers who were so affected are now back online?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, this affected customers' ability to pay utilizing this particular platform. This was addressed, the situation was rectified, and customers are now able to utilize this particular platform to pay the outstanding bills to TSTT.
Senator John?
Did the malware cause any TSTT information to be lost permanently, or has all the information been retrieved satisfactorily?
Minister?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I think I responded to that comprehensively in my response.
Senator John?
TSTT, I believe, most likely will have an integrated system with its vendors, and they also are part of that point of sale. Is TSTT satisfied that this malware did not, well, whether it affected them, and if this too was resolved satisfactorily?
Minister?
Madam Speaker, in my opening response, I responded to this particular issue comprehensively.
Senator John?
Madam President, in an effort to ensure that TSTT has more robust mitigation systems, have they boosted or invested money in an effort to prevent something like this from happening again, or mitigating against that? The recurrence, that is?
Senator John, I won't allow that question. Next question.
Question, you mean for the other minister, Madam President?
Question number 15.
Okay, fine. Question number 15 to the Minister of Public Utilities.
Minister of Public Utilities.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, TSTT has advised that the company did not raise any bonds on the international capital market in recent times.
Senator John?
Did TSTT then raise any money on the local market?
Well, Senator John, based on the question that was posed and the answer given, that question is not allowed.
So therefore, I suppose my other questions cannot follow through. Well, thank you, Madam President.
Public business, private members' business, motions.
Senator Nakhid? Senator Nakhid?
Madam President?
No, Senator Nakhid. The booth?
Let's come here?
Yes.
Okay. Madam President, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Madam President, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is the duty of the government to provide safe, reliable, and compassionate healthcare services for all citizens during a pandemic. And whereas during the COVID-19 pandemic, the government has failed to address the inequities in accessing healthcare services. And whereas the government has failed to meet the international standards for patient care, as is stated in the report of the committee appointed to investigate the factors contributing to clinical outcomes of COVID-19 patients in Trinidad and Tobago. And whereas the government has failed to effectively manage resources to facilitate the movement of critically ill patients to and from our nation's hospitals. Be it resolved that this Senate take note of the unacceptable number of deaths from COVID-19, and be it further resolved that this Senate call on the government to take immediate steps to initiate a commission of inquiry into the government's management of the COVID-19 pandemic at our nation's healthcare institutions. Madam President, I thank you for the opportunity to bring this motion to this honorable House. First of all, we of the UNC would like to extend our sincere commiserations and our support to those who over the last couple of weeks have suffered the tragic flooding that we have seen throughout the country and all the circumstances and calamitous events that accompany such floods and unseen occurrences. And Madam President, it is indeed unfortunate that the most tragic of circumstances that we, the citizens of this country, are now experiencing starkly mirrors the COVID-19 experience of the last 2.5 years. These disastrous events that we all are now witnessing are not the result of 2 weeks or even 2 months of rain. It is the result of 7 years of mismanagement, visionless leadership, poorly thought out policies, incompetence and corruption in an unprecedented manner. To paraphrase the MP for Barataria Sawan, this weather is not unprecedented, but the PNM's level of incompetence and corruption is. Well, Madam President.
Nakhid, I allowed you to make your opening statement, but I invite you now to deal with your substantive motion.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm guided. Well, Madam President, as it relates to this government's COVID-19 response, this pandemic of our time was and is unprecedented. But the PNM's mishandling of the response, with its incompetence, clueless leadership, was precedented. Because surely, Madam President, the hallmark of this PNM government has clearly been incompetence coupled with mendacity, corruption paralleled with obfuscation. As a matter of fact, Madam President, that is the only parallel that is accurate when we delve into the realities of this government's mishandling of this health crisis. Madam President, we need to look no further than the World Cup currently in action for an understanding of what is needed at the highest levels of a profession. For a World Cup, Madam President, we witnessed the elite of the elite, the so-called crème de la crème. Because the challenge at that highest end of the spectrum is what is needed. For the pandemic that the world faced, in a sort of a perverse way, this was an upper-level challenge that health professionals globally would face. This pandemic, too, required the crème de la crème, not aspiring professionals. In French, we say les espoirs, not hopefuls, which accurately describe what this government put in place. And we can make a comparative analysis, Madam President, which is also always helpful and informative in these situations, because the objective here of the UNC is to indicate where this government went wrong, contributing significantly and directly to over 4,200 deaths by COVID-19, most of which could have been avoided by astute and experienced enlightened leadership. So I looked around the world, Madam President. I too, like many of our citizens, now faced with the stark realization that we were never number one in the world, nor were we ever at such an elevated status. So I looked at the leaders around the world who had championed their country's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And nowhere, Madam President, would you believe, nowhere, not in one single country, did I find anyone less qualified to face the challenges of a pandemic than the man put in charge by our Prime Minister, the Honorable Minister of Health, Terrence Deyalsingh. There was no one less qualified than who we had in charge. It's like appointing the Minister of Tourism and Culture to be captain of the Trinidad and Tobago football team. Because that minister, he once impressed upon us in this chamber that he was able to reach the professional status of Senator Roberts and myself in professional sports because he took a sweat. Madam President, how ludicrous is it that a country faced, and we must admit, with such an unprecedented health crisis, would put not even a qualified medical doctor in charge of the most challenging health crisis our country has ever seen in its history. And we have to be fair to the Honorable Minister of Health. He did not appoint himself. But we have to be fair also to the citizens of this country, many of whom suffered under this government's handling. He should have, like several health ministers around the world, when realizing that they were unfit for purpose, he should have resigned. He did not. So therefore, Madam President, he has to come under scrutiny for his accepting a position he clearly was not fit for. Madam President, and that's exactly where we take issue with the Prime Minister, head of the Cabinet, Keith Christopher Rowley, placed this country in such a position by not appointing or even listening to the suggestions of our honorable opposition political leader, Kamla Prasad Bisesa, who offered the help of the opposition to the government. And the government flatly refused. And I will not, as we say, put water in my mouth, Madam President, but when you look at the depth of experience and talent on this side, I mean, just look across and we have the legend who is Dr. Tim Gopeesingh. We have public health specialists. We have qualified doctors with experience. Some of going so far back, they worked with my mother, Rita Harris Nakhid, when she was matron of Mount Hope Hospital. That is the kind of experience and the wealth of experience that the opposition offered to this government. What did we get, Madam President? Someone who has a BS in pharmacy.
All right, so Senator Nakhid, this is your motion. This is, and I have to point out to you, I'm trying to give you leeway, but the motion is not a motion on the Minister of Health. The motion is here before all of us, and therefore I'm going to ask you please to not go down the path you're going. You're personalizing this. It's not about the Minister of Health in the manner that you are presenting, okay?
I'm guided, Madam President. Let me make it abundantly clear that this is not about a personal attack on the goodly minister. It's about, was this minister qualified to lead this country during the most unprecedented of health crises? And we have to realize that these are not abstract matters, Madam President. All the words and all the actions are taken by people. In other words, Madam President, if we have people who have to enact and implement policy, we have to admit to ourselves, are they suitably qualified to implement those policies? So we have to take an honest look at their credentials, as you have said. So it's not a personal attack in any way, Madam President. It is taking an honest look at a crisis that has claimed the lives of 4,200 people. And I think we need to be honest to those who not only lost their lives, but the families of those who unnecessarily lost their lives. And that is important. This is not a ministry, Madam President, that doesn't have a direct influence on life and death. You know, we can talk about incompetence in education and say, well, it may contribute to, in later years, to delinquency, to school violence, to people being jobless. This is a ministry, Madam President, where there are no margins for error. That is the nature of the job. And that's what I am saying. When you appoint such a person, Madam President, in the elite level of governance, your choice has to reflect what that person brings to the table, Madam President. And we are saying in the opposition that this minister, and there's another person.
Madam President, on a point of order, 46.8, please.
Senator Nakhid, you are ignoring the advice that I've given you. There's a difference between filing a motion of no confidence in a particular minister and filing a motion such as the one that you have filed. The one that you have filed is about COVID and what was done during that period. So I'm going to have to invite you at this stage, 15 minutes into your presentation, to move away from the Minister of Health.
Okay, I'm guided. Thank you, Madam President. I think I did indeed speak enough of the lack of qualifications of the minister, so I move on. Madam President, here we come to, how did we end up with one of the highest death rates per 100,000 persons in the world? In that, we are almost #1 in the world. Madam Speaker, Madam President, with just over 4,200 COVID-19 deaths and a case fatality ratio of 2.3%, we have recorded 300 deaths per 100,000 persons in Trinidad and Tobago. We are currently the 173rd worst performing country out of 195 countries. In other words, number 22 from the bottom of the list. St. Kitts and Nevis is ranked number 101 with 86 deaths per 100,000. Dominica at number 105 with 95 deaths per 100,000. Jamaica at number 115 with 111 deaths per 100,000 citizens. To put that in context, Madam President, for every 100,000 persons in Trinidad and Tobago, we had 190 more deaths from COVID-19 than Jamaica. 2,000 more persons died here in Trinidad and Tobago as compared to Jamaica if it had an equivalent population. And Madam President, we've heard about these billions that the government borrowed. And when you see such a systemic failure in the healthcare response, we need to have an audit of those billions that this government claimed to have borrowed and used to respond to this unprecedented crisis. This administration, Madam President, through this minister, failed everyone with its policies and its leadership. Citizens died who did not have to die. And most of them, to be honest, Madam President, were poor and working class people who had no voice in what happened. We have the highest death rate in CARICOM. Surviving COVID-19, Madam President, was more the exception rather than the rule. Only the UK and the USA did worse than this government. But they never closed their borders, Madam President. They did not put, the USA and the UK did not close their borders, Madam President. We closed borders. We decimated livelihoods, lives and livelihoods. We locked 30,000 people out of the country. And we have to ask ourselves, was that political, Madam President? Because we saw numbers that seemed quite low before the election of August 2020. And then we saw, subsequently, after the election, these numbers skyrocketed, spiked. Our health infrastructure was totally overwhelmed. As a matter of fact, a lot of health professionals believe that what COVID-19 did was just highlight an already failing health infrastructure. And this government has no excuses, Madam President. They had 7 years. They have been in government 7 years. They have been warned by the opposition. Our Honorable Dr. Tim Gopeesingh brought that to the House in the other place. So they had sufficient warning, Madam President. But what did we get? We got cramped tents, Madam President. We got overflowing wards with inadequate drugs, equipment, and medical personnel. We had cockroach and moss-infested step-down facilities. Yes, cockroach, as we say. Patients passed when in many cases they could have been with us today, with their family, with their friends, with their life intact. As a matter of fact, Madam President, things reached to such an abysmal state that the first time that 2 ventilators were sourced and brought for 1.8 million TT was in November 22nd, 2021, well into the pandemic. Only then were ventilators bought. So it was a haphazard approach, disorganized policy implemented from the top down, Madam President. And the Prime Minister said that money was spent to keep us alive. In fact, 1 year ago, Minister Deyalsingh is on record saying that the Ministry of Health spent $480 million on the country's COVID-19 response since the beginning of the pandemic. This sum must be considerably more today. The CAF, Development Bank of Latin America, just recently approved $1.65 billion USD in financing for Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Peru, and Trinidad and Tobago. How much of that total did we receive? Madam Speaker, we have been told that COVID-19 funds were channeled into infrastructure, human resources, consumables, building, upgrading facilities, paying for quarantine, buying equipment, and PPE. We have to call into an audit. We have to call for an audit, Madam President, because we know that many of these facilities were left without PPE. There was not enough resources. There were not enough beds, not enough equipment or ventilators. And then perhaps, Madam President, we can look at the Minister of Finance in a standing finance committee admitted that the bulk of assistance received by this government for COVID management went into the consolidated fund. No wonder our ICU and HU were depleted of resources, equipment, and drugs. That is a direct quote from the Minister of Finance. So that money we received did not go to respond to the health crisis of COVID-19. He admitted that the bulk of assistance received, Madam President, by this government for COVID management went into the consolidated fund. And then perhaps, Madam President, we look, as the motion states, did we meet the international standards? Clearly we did not, Madam President. At the beginning of this pandemic, the opposition stated, like so many of the first world countries, that the most important element was testing, testing, testing. This government suffered the people of Trinidad and Tobago by only allowing PCR testing. That's what they did. This government refused to allow antigen testing, Madam President. And those, Madam President, so the public will know, they have a 97% efficacy rate, Madam President. Why would this government that can have testing cheap and available for the population only allow PCR testing at $1,200 a pop? $1,200 in a time of lockdown, broke-down, no money in people's hands, people jobless. Why did this government show such a lack of compassion and care to the people of Trinidad and Tobago? Well, Madam President, a lot of medical labs made millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, while people of this country couldn't afford food on their table. How would it be tested? How would this government have an accurate idea or vision? How can they implement a vision not knowing exactly who in the population had tested positive for COVID? So we had people walking around with COVID, showing no signs. We had people walking around with COVID, showing signs, but no one could afford the testing. This government certainly didn't pay for it. People had to reach into their own pockets for testing. And we would like this Minister of Health to answer to the people, why did they not allow the rapid antigen testing kits to be used? And from what we understand, the Minister of Health was sitting on 500,000 of those test kits, and he did not use them. And Madam President, and when he was asked about this, these WHO-approved test kits, he's on record as saying that the existing penalty for sales of these kits would be a fine of several hundreds of thousands of dollars plus 6 months in jail. When asked if they can be implemented in Trinidad and Tobago, he said, we are taking these fines very seriously. In other words, they were adamant. They were adamant that PCR testing alone would be allowed by this government. In other words, denying the poor and working class people of this country, who in a time of want, who in a time of scarcity, couldn't know if they were positive or not. He has to answer for this. The Minister of Health, Madam President, has to answer to this. So, Madam President, and you know, we have, in a constructive manner, to put the blame in hindsight, because a lot of these things can be avoided if, as I said before, there was astute leadership. We had none. But even in hindsight, if we want to improve for the future, the healthcare services or response to such a crisis, we have to speak about things that are well documented and that happened. Madam President, 50,000 people were irresponsibly encouraged to move between Trinidad and Tobago for an Easter weekend, and not one test was done with that movement. This at a time when the WHO, the CDA, and every major health agency recommended all to limit movement and groupings as much as possible. It is on record, Madam President, that our Prime Minister encouraged such a movement. 50,000 people moved between Trinidad and Tobago. Persons from hot pocket communities in Trinidad were allowed to get onto a plane or a boat and travel to Tobago. Our sister isle had 3 deaths due to COVID-19 at the time. Tobago now has 90 deaths. After 4 months, it increased to 90 deaths and hovers between 400 and 500 active cases in that year. The advice from the opposition and our honorable political leader was test, and test again. To do that, Madam President, would have required those 500,000 kits that the Minister of Health sat on, Madam President, sat on and did virtually nothing. And testing was a priority in other countries, Germany, Belgium, Spain, and by having lower numbers, it would be a justification. It would be almost affirmation for this PNM government draconian lockdown policies that we all went through. These policies, draconian as they were, contributed to the decimation of the economy and livelihoods, shutting down businesses, especially our small and medium enterprises. The minister can only explain to us what could have happened had these 500,000 antigen kits that he had been used before people were allowed to travel between Trinidad and Tobago for Easter 2021. I think, Madam President, only time will let us know how damaging to our healthcare sector and to our population, the deaths that arose out of that. Madam President, it brings me to perhaps, of all the mismanagement exhibited by this government in the COVID-19 crisis, it brings me to perhaps the biggest fabrication, the most outrageous falsehood that this government perpetrated upon the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And that is the so-called parallel healthcare system. Madam President, I love the language. I love the language. Since I'm small, I remember asking my father or my mother, what is the meaning of a word? And they would always say, look it up in the dictionary. The reason for that was they would tell me, look up the word before that word and the word after it. So I looked up the word parallel. As this Minister of Health claimed, if one were to read his CV, that he enacted a parallel healthcare system. Madam President, do you know that a simple perusal of a dictionary put paid to the misconception that we had indeed implemented a parallel healthcare system? By definition, Madam President, parallel is defined as lying or moving in the same direction, but always the same distance apart. In other words, Madam President, you cannot tell the population that you enacted a parallel healthcare system when all you did was to optimally use assets that were already present in the healthcare system. In other words, if the government because of its vindictiveness, did not use Couva Children's Hospital, but only after weeks into the pandemic, weeks, Madam President, they operationalized the Couva Children's Hospital. They cannot make the claim that they finished or they met an unfinished facility. That is impossible. You cannot in 3 weeks operationalize a hospital that has been mothballed. Impossible, Madam President. What they did, the government chose not to use the Couva Children's Hospital, and only because of the COVID-19 pandemic, they were able to utilize that asset. That is not parallel healthcare, Madam President. That means if that is touted as parallel healthcare, this Minister of Health has no idea what he's talking about. I'll tell you why, Madam President. When one looks at countries around the world who have in truth and in fact implemented parallel healthcare, and we take Canada for example, what they have done, they've either partnered with the private healthcare, whereby they can more or less subcontract to the private healthcare system the cases at that point in time who were not COVID-19. For example, they would have said, let's pick West Shore, a facility frequented by our Prime Minister. And he doesn't get on a maxi taxi as...
Senator Nakhid, move on, please. Move on.
Yes. So we know that there's very much healthcare, that private healthcare that is used by government ministers and other ministers or other parliamentarians. We have no doubt. Why didn't this government implement what is truly a parallel healthcare system? And we would like this minister not to come and speak in his response about the opposition spoke about sunlight and punching. This is not time for jocularity or for his buffoonery to come to fore. You know, you can hear him now speaking, it's a fact. Obviously, it shows his clear misunderstanding or grasp of a situation that is serious, that he can sit there and laugh while I'm talking about the deaths of 4,200 people. It's not funny to me. It's not funny to me. So I think rather than come with some inanity, the country would be well served if he were to answer, why didn't this Minister of Health partner with the private healthcare services, because billions were spent, according to this government? Why didn't he let all those surgeries, all those appointments that were canceled because the healthcare system was overwhelmed by COVID-19 patients, why didn't he do that? He did not. The reason being is frankly incompetence. And when I say incompetence, Madam President, it's not a personal attack, it's about the work, Madam President. It's about the work. Are you capable to lead a country into such a pandemic? Clearly you were not. And whether or not he would like to trivialize the argument, as we heard him say now, it's true and so. It's up to them, Madam President. It is our duty as the loyal opposition to bring it to the citizens of this country that they were not well served by this minister. They did not get value for money from this minister. Madam President, there's no way around it. And I'll tell you why. When you move within an entity, Madam President, the state has certain amount of assets within the healthcare system. You don't shift around entities within that system and call it parallel healthcare. That's not how it works. other than using the private healthcare as a true parallel system, so we would not have had, as we had, a mother giving birth on the side of the road because there was no space. And that is documented, Madam President. Other than that, you would have said, okay, the private healthcare system will take care of everything that we, now the government, are busy, we are preoccupied, we are overwhelmed with the COVID-19. Let the private healthcare system deal with the other cases. No. Madam President, I went to Mount Hope to visit a friend who was in hospital with COVID-19. People were in the corridors, Madam President. People were on the ground, Madam President. That is not an attack on the minister. It's an attack on his competence, his suitability for the job, Madam President. People died unnecessarily, Madam President. This is not a laughing matter, as they seem to be laughing on that side. It's not a laughing matter. Everyone was affected. Everyone is affected by what happened in COVID-19. In other hemispheres, there would be criminal action being taken, Madam President, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. To show you just how the level of apathy that this government exhibited. Do you know, Madam President, that in countries other than Trinidad and Tobago, because of the mishandling of the COVID-19, we had ministers of health sometimes more than once, in a few months even, fired because of this mishandling. And I'll give you examples. In Ecuador, the health minister of Ecuador, Rodolfo Fafa, had to resign 3 weeks after he was appointed. He was alleged of exhibiting favoritism in the country's vaccine rollout scheme. And I'll get to that in a moment. In Austria, the health minister, Rudolf Anschober, submitted his resignation on April 13th after he said that he was overworked due to the COVID situation and felt that the country needed a fitter person for the role. In Iraq, the health minister, Hassan al-Tamimi, resigned after several unfortunate incidents at a COVID hospital, killed almost 80 people. In Jordan, and this is I think an exceptional example, the health minister, Nazir Obaidat, resigned from his post in March after 6 people died of an oxygen shortage at a state-run hospital. He was asked to step down by the country's prime minister, Bashar al-Qassalni. Obaidat said that he carried a moral responsibility for the oxygen shortage incident. Madam President, I mean, not to put a fine point on it, but we saw no such action in our country, as I stated before, showed an alarming amount of death.
Senator Nakhid, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. So, Madam President, I have so much information, I think 45 minutes will not do justice to our prosecution of what we deem to be an extremely incompetent and horrific handling of the situation. But I would like to leave you with this, Madam President. I hope in my closing I can delve deeper. At this elite level of governance, this is where we are, Madam President. We are MPs, we are senators. Incompetence at this elite level of governance costs lives. People die. So if you have incompetence, for example, in any other portfolio, whether it be the Ministry of National Security, where you would see if incompetence occurs there, you might get over 550 murders for the year. You might see the incident at Rose Hill, you will see porous borders, which results in almost an estimate of 14,000 illegal guns. Because this is, you're talking about the elite level of governance, Madam President. There's no margin for error here. At this level of governance, Madam President, if there's incompetence in a portfolio like the Ministry of Health, which directly affects life and death, Madam President, we need to be honest about our approach to where this government has taken us. It's not sufficient for us to say that if we had not been here, it would have been worse. It is not sufficient for them to say that we did our best and to reward medical personnel who, to be honest, Madam President, were not the true heroes of this case. The doctors, the nurses, the medical professionals on the ground are the true heroes of this pandemic, Madam President. They are the ones. And by the way, I'd like to remind the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Health that we are at the end of November and the nurses have not been given their bonus until now. So we see where the emphasis of this government lies, Madam President. It is not about the health and well-being of the nation. It is not about giving the taxpayer value for his money. It is about them putting up numbers, coming with some memes and rhetoric to misdirect the population and to point fingers at the opposition. When will this government, Madam President, take responsibility for what, as I have pointed out, has been a completely inadequate and incompetent response to the COVID-19 pandemic? Regretfully, Madam President, I take leave of this motion with a quotation from a saint of the Middle East who said, to ensure the decimation of society, to ensure chaos and corruption in a society, one only needs to put the wrong people in the highest offices. Madam President, I beg to move.
Someone needs to second the motion.
I beg to second the motion and reserve the right to speak at a later time in the proceedings.
The motion has been seconded by Senator John. Honourable Senators, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is, whereas it is the duty of the government to provide safe, reliable and compassionate healthcare services for all citizens during a pandemic, and whereas during the COVID-19 pandemic, the government has failed to address the inequities in accessing healthcare services, and whereas the government has failed to meet the international standards for patient care, as is stated in the report of the committee appointed to investigate the factors contributing to clinical outcomes of COVID-19 patients in Trinidad and Tobago, and whereas the government has failed to effectively manage resources to facilitate the movement of critically ill patients to and from our nation's hospitals, be it resolved that this Senate take note of the unacceptable number of deaths from COVID-19, and be it further resolved that this Senate call on the government to take immediate steps to initiate a commission of inquiry into the government's management of the COVID-19 pandemic at our nation's healthcare institutions. Minister of Health.
Madam President, may I kindly ask how much time do I have?
Minister, you have 40 minutes.
40 minutes. Thank you very, very much. I wish I can say it's a pleasure to be here, but as an MP, Tuesday is my constituency day, the day when I meet constituents. And I would have preferred to be in my constituency office today, meeting and treating with my constituents who have been affected by flooding, landslides, and everything else that goes with it. But here am I today, being called away from treating with my constituents' real problems, dealing with COVID. What an absolute abuse and waste of the Senate's time. The UNC ought to be condemned for wasting the Senate's time today of all days on a motion like this. Madam President, I am speaking from the point of view as a practitioner who worked in the trenches. I am not speaking as a mere critic, an uninformed expert. You will get the impression from the motion that pandemics come once every 10 years, and that we had 10 of these in the past 100 years. We had one. So when you read the motion, you get the impression from Senator Nakhid that this is something that we are accustomed doing. Nothing could be further than from the truth. Madam President, he speaks about the creme de la creme. Dr. Roshan Parasram, ORTT. You want more creme de la creme than that? Dr. Mariam Richards, Shakonia Gold. Dr. Avery Hines, Shakonia Gold. Dr. Michelle Trotman, Shakonia Gold. Professor Christine Carrington, Shakonia Gold. That is creme de la creme. My friend spoke about they have qualified doctors, Dr. Tim Gopeesingh, and it was so predictable that a UNC senator will fall ill today. Because whenever there's a health matter, a UNC senator falls ill and Dr. Tim Gopeesingh appears. It is so predictable. If Dr. Tim Gopeesingh was so wonderful, why didn't he bring down maternal and mortality rates in Trinidad and Tobago when he was a member of the Kamla Prasad government? Why didn't he do it? He's so brilliant. Under him, you had 1.5 women dying per month in our hospitals in childbirth. You know how much have died for the year? 1 so far. I did that. Because everything revolves around the Minister of Health. Why didn't Dr. Tim Gopeesingh, this great physician, do that? It's amazing. It's a pity that the mover of this motion, and Madam President, may I say, I have the same identical motion in the lower house. The same motion in the lower house, to waste time again in the lower house. I would love to know who wrote this motion, because clearly it was not Senator Nakhid, because not even he understood the motion. He did not address his own motion in his own name, and he had to be pulled up several times. Whereas it is the duty, first recital, of the government to provide safe, reliable, and compassionate health care to all citizens during a pandemic, a once-in-a-100-year event. The pandemic revealed the resilience of Trinidad and Tobago's healthcare system. The key strategies for the provision of a safe, reliable, and compassionate healthcare services for all nationals, non-nationals, and other vulnerable groups during the pandemic. And what did we do? The development of the parallel healthcare system. My friend says we should have engaged the private sector. The private sector has less than 400 beds. At the height of the pandemic, we had 1,000 beds in the parallel healthcare system. How on earth would you use 400 beds to put 1,000 people? But you see the misunderstanding of the mover of the motion. And where would the patients who normally go to the private sector go for their health care? Right? But use the private sector. Less than 400 beds, but at the height of the thing, we had over 1,000 beds in the parallel healthcare system. What did that do, Madam President? It slowed the spread of the virus because COVID-19 patients were segregated from the normal patients. This was unique in the world. But only in Trinidad and Tobago we beat ourselves and don't congratulate ourselves for what we have done. Madam President, the benefits of the parallel healthcare system, it decreases the burden on the traditional healthcare system. So emergency surgeries could go ahead. Radiological services could go ahead. It helps reduce transmission, the separation of confirmed cases from non-infected cases. It mitigates resource shortages. And may I say for the umpteenth time, we never had a shortage of world-class PPE in Trinidad and Tobago. But the UNC in this era of the big fib, because I can't say the big L, the big fib continues to say that. You had a nurse in Cora doing a Sunday Express article saying that her cousin in New York wished that they had the PPE we had in Trinidad. But we beat up ourselves. We can't admit we did something right. Madam President, as I continue with this motion, between the period October 2020 and March 22, we employed over 2,270 medical and non-medical staff to man the parallel healthcare system. Where would the private sector find 2,000 people? Where? But that is Senator Nakhid's solution. Use the private sector. Absolute poppycock. Madam President, we trained our people. We trained them in basic emergency care. We had a boot camp for experienced nurses. We trained in IPC, infection prevention and control, care of the ventilated patient. And let me say it again, there was never a shortage of ventilators in Trinidad and Tobago. Never, ever, ever during COVID. But again, this is the UNC. Party first, country second. Bar talk Trinidad and Tobago. Make us look like a basket case. Intensive, Madam Speaker, I wasn't talking when he was speaking, you know. I was laughing at stupidity.
No, Minister, please. Senator Nakhid, you had your opportunity to present your motion. Please give the Minister his opportunity to respond.
Madam President, we will come to the issue of mental health response, and other colleagues will go into detail on that because that's very, very important. But notice, we launched a mental health response which was compassionate, which was free, absolutely free, absolutely free. But other speakers will go into that because I have bigger fish to fry. But I will just give you some data on some of the mental health initiatives. We launched Find Care TT. There were 34,804 users and 65,336 page views. That is how widespread it was. Most visited pages, suicide prevention, gender-based violence, addiction, 24/7 hotlines, Trinidad and Tobago Psychologists Association, and so on. But other speakers will go into that. Because we have to integrate mental health into our primary services. Madam President, one of the sequelae of COVID is long COVID. And again, we recognize that. The WHO says that it usually occurs within 3 months of the onset of COVID-19, with symptoms that could last 2 months and cannot be explained by an alternative diagnosis. We have several long COVID clinics, free of charge. And other speakers will go into detail about this free long COVID service we are offering people of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, the second recital says, and whereas the COVID-19 pandemic, the government has failed to address the inequities in accessing healthcare services. Do you know what that means? That only rich people can come into the public healthcare system. Where does Senator Nakhid get this from? Our system in Trinidad and Tobago has always been universal access regardless of race, color, creed, income, socioeconomic conditions. And it is this government talking about inequities, is giving poor women the environment to have their babies without dying. Never happened under the UNC. 1.5 women were dying a month. Under the UNC, 12 to 15 women a year will die. Divide that by 12 to get 1.5. We did that. We dropped neonatal mortality rates by more than 50%. Right now, more than 100 newborn babies are alive per year under this government than under the UNC. No insurance, no fees. What more equitable system do you want? And it's open to migrants for primary healthcare services. And Madam Speaker, could Senator Nakhid pay me the courtesy that I paid him?
Senator Nakhid, please. You have to remain silent while the minister is making his contribution.
So let's talk about inequities and access. Letter to the editor, Wednesday, 23rd November, 2022. Impressed by service at Sando ENT Clinic, Lennox Singh. You want more than that? We recently launched a new lung cancer initiative talking about inequities, because one newspaper editorial said people have to mortgage to get health care. Mr. Nishad Mohammed, 45 years old, and Madam President, I ask you to be able to quote his words. In June 2017, I was diagnosed with stage 2 N1 adenocarcinoma in my right lung. Could you imagine that diagnosis? A man with limited means. Prior to going into surgery to repair a tendon, during an X-ray, the radiologist saw a mass on my right lung about 3.2 centimeters in diameter. After surgery, I was referred to the thoracic surgical unit. A biopsy was done, and we found it was adenocarcinoma stage 2. I had surgery free of charge. During this time, under the lung cancer unit, using the brand new equipment that we have, $1.2 million US, the services rendered were excellent, not my words. This is Mr. Nishad Mohammed. You may have seen the scented spray ad in the newspapers advertising this. I was told that my life expectancy was 5 years more. Stage 4 lung cancer patient. What inequities are we speaking about? Last piece of evidence, Madam President. A letter to the editor that appeared July 28, 2022. Headline, Sando A&E made me feel like a proud taxpayer, not my words. Please allow me to express my experience at the San Fernando A&E. He went on to say the type of care he got, and he was so impressed by it. And did I mention this system is now paper-free? No more walking around with those big X-ray images under your arm. Something has improved. He had 5 doctors attending to him. His attending physician was Dr. C. Ramcharan. I left the hospital at 6 p.m., but in that time, the tests were done. Kidney and liver function, X-ray, blood analysis, CT, and cholesterol, all free. And he wrote to the paper saying, Sando A&E made me feel like a proud taxpayer. That is equitable access. That is equitable access. And that goes on throughout the system every day, every night, 7 days a week. The third recital, because you see, even the mover did not mention his recitals. And whereas the government failed to meet the international standards for patient care, as is stated in the report of the committee appointed to investigate the factors contributing to clinical outcomes of COVID-19 patients in Trinidad and Tobago, all of a sudden, the UNC has embraced the Simongal report. All of a sudden, the Simongal report is the best thing since sliced bread. Let me read what Dr. Tim Gopeesingh said about the Simongal report. And I have the article here, Loop. UNC MP slams sham probe into healthcare system. The ex-MP, that is Tim Gopeesingh, raised even more concerns, implying that the findings may not be authentic. So here we are.
Senator, no, just 1 second. Senator Gopeesingh, please, you will have your opportunity. This is not the place to just be shouting across the floor, okay? Continue, Minister.
Thank you. So it's a sham report, but now it's the best thing since sliced bread. Opposition refers to COVID Care Review Committee as Papi Show. Opposition leader Kamla Persad-Bissessar has dismissed the recently announced review of COVID-19 care as a Papi Show. But now, she says she believes they are being set up to fail and to serve no other function than to rubber stamp the government's COVID-19 management policies. That is the leader of the opposition. Madam President, you know what was their solution to COVID? Hydroxychloroquine. Puncheon and lime. Senator Mark stood here in this parliament and said, you know, puncheon and lime good for the virus. Sunlight. I want to put on record that if we had listened to the UNC on hydroxychloroquine, and it was not only Dr. Gopeesingh who recommended that to the Prime Minister. I want to quote from an Express November 5th, 2022 article. This is just a couple of weeks ago, after the Honorable Prime Minister contracted COVID. He, that is Dr. Fuad Khan now, former Minister of Health, he recommended that Rowley take hydroxychloroquine to help with his recovery. Where does the UNC get this love affair with hydroxychloroquine? It is my duty now, Madam President, if you will permit me to quote from the Lancet and to put on record what the Lancet says about hydroxychloroquine. Hydroxychloroquine for COVID-19. The curtains close on a comedy of errors. That is the highlight, the headline from a Lancet article. It was a comedy of errors, but that was the UNC solution to COVID. And I quote, in this gold rush, some of these trials competed for the same patients, including, unfortunately, trials that we collectively participated in. Regrettably, before the first randomized controlled trial was complete. That is science. They didn't do the science. Hydroxychloroquine became a cause célèbre, and the UNC latched onto that. Dr. Tim Gopeesingh latched onto it. Dr. Fuad Khan latched onto it. It goes on to say, consequently, most outpatient trials failed to enroll to its completion, and none were independently large enough to definitely refute a small benefit in this setting. It failed to demonstrate any benefit to hydroxychloroquine in preventing progression of COVID-19 amongst outpatients with initially mild COVID-19. But here comes the coup de grace for hydroxychloroquine. Ultimately, hydroxychloroquine did not have clinical benefit for COVID-19, but it was the fad at the time, and the UNC latched on to this. The efforts of the trialists and the goodwill of patients who volunteered for the studies should not be diminished. But lessons extricated from this fiasco, you hear the words? I must listen to them and give hydroxychloroquine. But lessons extricated from this fiasco must galvanize us to do better in the next pandemic. That is the final death knell to the UNC's reliance on hydroxychloroquine as recently as 5th November 2022, as espoused by a former Minister of Health under the UNC, Dr. Fuad Khan. You see, he's a good thing the PNM was in power. Imagine a former UNC Minister of Health, after all this evidence, is advocating for hydroxychloroquine. Oh my gosh. Madam President, before I continue, I want to clarify something because somebody is going to raise it in the Simangal report. and that has to do with the drug tocilizumab. WHO recommends that drug for severe and critical patients, which is what we did. But somebody from that side will get up and say, we didn't have it available for everybody. That was never the clinical guideline for tocilizumab. It was only supposed to be used on the severe and critical patients, and we did that. So I'm just preempting the mischief which will come on that particular drug. But what did the Simangal report say? The committee, that is the Simangal committee, found that the admissions, discharge, and transfer policies for COVID-19 patients are within the ambit of international best practice, especially as recommended by the WHO. But to listen to the UNC, you would think we got standards from I don't know where. Let me repeat that. The same Simangal report that MP Gopeesingh and the Honorable Kamala Prasad-Bissessa said is a sham and everything else said, and I repeat, the committee found that admissions, discharge, and transfer policies for COVID-19 patients are within the ambit of international best practice, especially as recommended by WHO. They concluded that the treatment of COVID-19 in Trinidad and Tobago followed WHO guidelines. But my friend was talking about CDA. CDA is Chagarama's Development Authority. I think what you meant to say is CDC, Centers for Disease Control. But you said CDA. CDA is Chagarama's Development Authority. We don't follow Chagarama's Development Authority, nor do we follow blindly the CDC. The CDC is a stringent authority for the United States. Good authority. But we in Trinidad and Tobago, for COVID-19, follow the WHO. They concluded that the treatment of COVID-19 in Trinidad and Tobago followed the WHO guidelines. This was borne out by comparisons of WHO publications on COVID-19 and the national guidelines on COVID-19, as well as the protocols of the RHAs. So we adhered to international best practice. Recital 4. And whereas the government has failed to effectively manage resources to facilitate the movement of critically ill patients to and from our nation's hospitals. Madam President, this is a once-in-a-100-year event. You literally, as all over the world, you had to fly the plane and build it at the same time, especially in the first year. The movement of critically ill patients to and from our nation's hospitals was conducted through our national ambulance service provider, Global Medical Response. And may I add, Global Medical Response will not move a patient between a private facility and a public facility. So that is another reason you could not use the private facilities for COVID. The private facilities don't have a contract with GMRTT, Senator Nakhid. It is the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago that has a contract with GMRTT to bring patients to a public setting. My gosh. The number of transport conducted by GMRTT were this: 2020, 1,417 patients. 2021, 6,159. And for October, July 2022, 2,704. This was just for COVID. This was just for COVID. Never before in the history of Trinidad and Tobago was a logistical transportation mechanism ever done. Ever done. And, you know, instead of congratulating GMRTT and everybody else, point out the flaws. Yes, there were certain things we could have done better, but we never had the experience. The UNC will have you believe there's a playbook for this and everything is perfect. Nowhere was perfect. In Italy, you had hearses with dead persons coming before a father, and the father will just say a 15-second mass, sign of the cross, and you go and bury your dead. In New York, you had cadavers leaking out bodily fluids in refrigerated trucks. We never had that in Trinidad and Tobago. Give us some credit now. Give us some credit now. In Italy, they couldn't have a mass to bury their dead. 15 seconds, the father will say his prayer. 15 seconds. They had to dig mass graves in some island in New York to put people in. It was a global pandemic of unprecedented proportions. Recital 5. Be it resolved that the Senate take note of the unacceptable number of deaths of COVID-19. And I agree, over 4,000 deaths. But let's analyze those deaths. Let's analyze those deaths. And my friend spoke about case fatality ratio. Madam Speaker, Madam President, you cannot take the case fatality ratio of one country and compare it to another, and I will explain why. Yemen has a case fatality ratio of over 29, but that's an outlier. And then the country with the lowest is under 1. Very small population of 10,000, 20,000. So take out the outliers, Yemen, and take out those very small populations, island populations with 20,000 people that are isolated from the rest of the world. Our case fatality ratio is 2.3. That is the only thing Senator Nakhid got right. However, when we disaggregate, it was noted that the majority of COVID-19 fatalities had one or more pre-existing chronic diseases conditions. Diabetes, 54.2%. Did I create that problem? Everybody knows with diabetes, your immune system is depressed. Hypertension, 64.2%. Those were the main drivers, NCDs. This corresponds to this elevated prevalence of NCDs in the population. But what again? Our low vaccination rates. While vaccination against COVID-19 was made available, only 51.3% of the population availed themselves of the vaccine, and the majority of deaths were with the unvaccinated. Comparing the rates of death among the vaccinated and unvaccinated, 317 of 717,000 among the vaccinated versus 3,545 of the 682,000, we calculate a 91.5 reduction in the death amongst the vaccinated. So what this told us, if more people were vaccinated and did not believe the vaccine conspiracy theories, and I'll come to that soon, because Senator David Nakhid cannot and will not escape responsibility here today for his statements on vaccination. And why can't we compare case fatality ratios? Case fatality ratios is the number of deaths as the numerator over the number of known positive cases as your denominator. The comparison of CFRs between countries is generally discouraged, as several factors may differ between countries that affect the data available in calculating CFRs. Why? Countries with more resources may extend testing to asymptomatic patients. Therefore, your denominator, that number goes up. We didn't do that in Trinidad. We stuck to the case definition. Number of deaths divided by number of positive cases. Many countries, in order to have a better CFR, increase their denominator. We never did that here. Separate attribution of deaths to COVID-19 may vary from one country to another. Trinidad and Tobago made the choice to be maximally inclusive in this regard, counting all deaths, whether you died with COVID or of COVID. Many countries did not do that. And the CMO has been at pains to explain that. So our CFR may be artificially high, but we stuck to the case definition. Right? So that is why you can't look at CFR of one country to another. Recital 6, and I'm going to take my time on this one. Be it further resolved that this Senate call for the government to take immediate steps to initiate a commission of inquiry. Good. I have been keeping a package of documents that if for some reason, God forbid that the UNC comes into office, this will be introduced into evidence at a COE. Letter to the editor. Dear editor, stupidity kills. Neither God nor sunlight was ever going to save us from COVID. You remember that famous statement by the leader of the opposition in 2021 on that tent with rain falling, that the reason we were doing good in COVID then was because of sunlight? How many people believe that? How many people looked to her for leadership and said, you know what? Throw all caution to the wind. Sunlight will save me. This is a letter to the editor. Dear editor, stupidity kills. Neither God nor sunlight was ever going to save us from COVID. And that letter was written by, I think the gentleman's name is here somewhere. Madam Speaker, now I come to the issue of vaccinations and lawsuits. We never got the assistance of the UNC, never got their assistance in managing COVID. Countries that did better than us had a unity of purpose. People put aside politics and said, we are facing this invisible, highly contagious enemy once in 100 years. Let us band together, put aside political differences, yellow and red, Republican, Democrat, communism, whatever, and save lives. Put country first, not party first. I'm going to give you an example of some of the legal actions that we had to endure. And listen to the lawyers that led the charge. Ian Allain versus Michelle Trotman. Mr. G. Ramdeen, U.D. Maraj, D. Harry Paul. Karen Ramsarup versus Michelle Trotman at Cora. Mr. G. Ramdeen, Maraj, Harry Paul. Another one, Ram Logan, Rambachan, Jagru, Bailey. Another lawsuit, Ram Logan. 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 Another lawsuit, Ram Logan, Jayanti Lakshmi Dayal. Another lawsuit, Ramdeen. Another lawsuit, Ram Logan, Jayanti Lakshmi Dayal. Another lawsuit, Ram Logan, Jayanti Lakshmi Dayal. Ram Logan, Rambachan, Jayanti Lakshmi Dayal. Another one, Ram Logan, Lakshmi Dayal. Another one, Ram Logan, Lakshmi Dayal. Another one, Ramdeen. Another one, Ramdeen. And so it goes. The UNC took a calculated decision to work against the people of Trinidad and Tobago by bringing all these frivolous suits. All. Another UNC senator, list of matters in which Senator Jayanti Lakshmi Dayal appeared as Mr. Ram Logan's Jr. Marsha Walker versus the AG. You know who Marsha Walker is? Marsha Walker is a UNC candidate in Diego Martin West who is sometimes sworn in here as an independent senator.
Thank you.
Minister, continue, please.
I am just telling the country that we never had the support of the UNC in fighting COVID as a country. Because the PNM puts country first and party second, they put party first and country second. Let's talk about vaccine hesitancy now, 51.3%. The mover of this motion, because vaccines could save lives. You want to know why 4,000 people died? Well, I gave you the statistic that most of the deaths were people with NCDs and people who were unvaccinated.
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
Yes, ma'am, I'm keeping track. Senator Nakhid said he will not take the vaccine because he doesn't want to live in a communist country. Russia developed the Sputnik vaccine. Cuba developed the Abdala vaccine, and China developed the Sinopharm vaccine.
46, 6, imputation and proper motives, I never said it.
Continue, Minister.
Thank you very much. MP Munilal, TT must be cautious about becoming part of a guinea pig program. That is what the UNC did. They sabotaged the vaccination program before it started. And now you want to bring a motion and a commission of inquiry. All of this, because I am saving all of this will go before anybody to see what the UNC did. You sabotaged everything. In the last couple of minutes I have, Madam Speaker, I promised this country we will do a seroprevalence study. I can tell the country today I have the preliminary results of the seroprevalence study. We took 961 blood samples from May to June 2022. A convenience sample methodology was therefore utilized. Immunity in this study means the presence of a reactive result when the blood is tested. This may be either naturally acquired factors, example infection, or artificially acquired factors, vaccination. I am telling the country this for the first time. These are the preliminary figures. Number of samples collected, 961. Number of samples discarded, 12. Number of samples tested, 949. This is the result, preliminary results. Number of samples which were non-reactive, meaning you have no antibodies, 50, or 5.27%. Total number of samples which were reactive, that is, you have antibodies against COVID-19, whether induced through vaccination or naturally acquired through infection, 94.73%. Those are the figures that I got from the University of the West Indies. These are independent figures. I leave the scientific community to judge that we have 94.73% immunity out of 949 samples. But these are preliminary results. Madam Speaker, the crowning dagger in the heart of the UNC now is the ruling of the Privy Council of June 20th, 2022. How much more time do I have, Madam? 2 minutes? Yes. This is the Privy Council. The country's approach to managing the COVID-19 pandemic has therefore been conclusively endorsed by the country's highest court of law. In particular, the Privy Council rejected arguments of unconstitutionality and interference with religious beliefs. This ruling is important, it's an important vindication of the government's long-standing legislative agenda and use of legislation passed without a supermajority. The issue has been the subject of running vocal complaints by members of the opposition. You are cited in the Privy Council, who have baselessly claimed that this approach was contrary to the Constitution. This is not me. This is the law lords at the Privy Council saying that the UNC, you were baseless in your accusations. It goes on to praise who? The Minister of Health. It goes on to praise who? The Chief Medical Officer. We are mentioned in a Privy Council judgment. And you have the gall to come and talk about my qualifications today? Well, the law lords disagree with you. Madam President, I thank you.
Senator Deyalsingh. Senator Deyalsingh.
Thank you, Madam President, for allowing me to take part in this debate. Very important debate as I'm hearing on both sides. of the bench there. And I must say, Senator Nakhid's motion serves to look at the duty of the government to provide safe, reliable, compassionate healthcare services for all citizens during the pandemic. Also, has the government failed to address inequities in assessing healthcare? And I saw the Minister of Health did, have some level of irritability, saying that, are there any inequities existing here as we have a free healthcare? It also served to ask if the question that has the government failed to meet the international standards for patient care. The Minister of Health did say we'll follow the WHO guidelines. And as it's stated in the report of the committee appointed to investigate the factors contributing to the clinical outcomes of COVID-19 patients in Trinidad and Tobago, has the government failed to effectively manage resources to facilitate the movement of critically ill patients to and from our nation's hospital? And also it asks the question that should we now have a commission of inquiry into the government's management of the COVID-19 pandemic at our healthcare institutions. So I'm seeing what is asked for, what Senator Nakhid serves to try to accomplish today. And as the Minister of Health said, there is flooding in the area, and I too have flooding in my area. And so it might be a bit to come here to try to debate COVID, which persons want to put behind us. Persons want to move on. Persons have decided that, hey, we have other pressing issues. We have crime. We have the flooding. And to come now and debate this, it's bringing it back and rehashing things. So in a sense, I can see the Minister of Health's concern that he would be out there. And even my also concern that, there are things to do in my community. And here we are discussing this pandemic, which has, relatively, I would say, behind us. But then I must say, madam, I try to figure, is the pandemic really behind us? Is it that if we have a commission of inquiry, will that help us in any way? Because we know what transpired. We know the government was not prepared. The world was not prepared for what happened. We were on ground that we had to learn basically how to manage, how to keep afloat. And there were a lot of programs that came about, things like wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, the lockdowns, the SOE. Different things had to come about at certain times. And I guess it was the government's way of trying to keep our population safe. And I don't think the government had any reason not to keep our population safe, and all their efforts were geared towards this. We have to understand we have members of the population, some young people who are very hardened. They wouldn't listen to the certain restrictions given. They would want to party, they would want to continue. Hence, if you know our culture, you may be forced to put in the lockdowns, the state of emergency to keep this disease in place. So, however, COVID, as I say, it's a really a tale of horrors and heroes. Horrors when, we saw families being wiped out, sometimes orphans, in other cases, patients having problems sometimes. And the minister did admit there were certain problems. People went to hospitals. I had a patient who fell off the bed, stayed there on the floor for hours. There were things that were pointed out. There were a lot of things that was disturbing to look at. People, up to last week, I had somebody told me they went to Cora. They went to one of the hospitals and they did a test and the test didn't come back and they were not sure it's COVID. They allowed her to go home and a week after the result came back positive. So the thing is, she signed herself out actually, but the thing is, there would have been problems because our health services had challenges before. Our health service was not perfect. And now, faced with this pandemic, we really had some problems because the staffing, the equipment, hospitals, the Minister of Health did bring about a parallel system, which in my opinion was an excellent thing. It did serve its purpose. So the thing I want to know, Madam President, the first patient who had COVID was my neighbor, and he's still in the area, but he 2 houses from me. And I had a first-hand experience when he went Cora the first time. They had to break the lock to get in. The food wasn't coming in time, but that was the first patient. And after that, we had an onslaught of patients throughout our health system, and it was really a difficult time. And I must say, we have to congratulate the doctors, the creme de la creme, who got their awards, as well as the members of staff. There's all the first responders who out there who came out in the pandemic, the waitress who came to serve, the persons who, scavengers who delivered, they were the true heroes. So we had the heroes, but we also had the horrors. And we had challenges that we were not prepared for. And you know, the WHO sometimes give us different reports in the beginning, mask, not a mask, and we had to decide lockdown, we had to decide vaccines. You know, so there were a lot of challenges, the open cremation, so the challenges were there. And, you know, even though we were not prepared, I think, you know, we have to now see what we can learn. So with a commission of inquiry, give us actually something that we could have some policy, something in place in case something else comes about. Because remember, the WHO is keeping close watch over something called disease X. And this is an unknown pathogen, and since 2017, they said it's a known pathogen that can cause serious problems. And they had the virologists and 300 scientists since 2017 looking out for this disease X, which is still to come. And with global warming, we don't know what can come out of the jungle. We have to be prepared for this. So there are around 11 diseases that they look at, and they look at Ebola, Lassa fever, Middle East syndrome, SARS, Zika, etc. But disease X is on the list. So therefore, we have to prepare. We have to make sure that whatever we have in place, all the shortcomings we had before, as Minister mentioned, would not come about again. So therefore, a commission of inquiry may do us some good. Now, so what I'm looking at, Senator Nakhid bringing this here, I think, is not just a matter of politics. It's just not a matter of trying to get some sort of mileage, not a matter of embarrassing government. Because even the WHO said that COVID is not over. We can't just say that COVID is in the rearview mirror. It is still here. And we have to realize that Tedros Ghebreyesus, the director of WHO, said that after 6 million deaths and 2 years later, that he had a release on the 14th of September, where he said that we have to be prepared that the virus could mutate. We have to take a hard look at what the policies that governments had. And this is what we're attempting to do there, and how we can strengthen them for COVID-19 and future pathogens with the economic potential. Dr. Maria Van Kirk, who was the House technical lead in COVID-19, said we can expect future waves, but this does not need to translate into waves of death. So today, if we could get somehow policies in place to prevent any further death, I would welcome that. And you see, the minister said that looking at the inequities of the senators, Nakhid saying that there was inequities. But I want to say, UK had a report, and this also spoke of inequities. So UK had a report, madam, in July 2021, where they looked at the pandemic and during the pandemic, and the report actually was labeled on equal pandemic, fairer recovery. So even in the UK, they spoke of the inequities. So it's not just here. So this is something, even though Senator Nakhid raised it, it's something that is raised globally. So Australia is also had the NSW government. They are looking at the NSW government's management of the COVID-19 pandemic. There's another inquiry there. So looking at what government did, sometimes we shouldn't look at it as something just politicized motion, but we have to look at it. It's happening elsewhere. So, for instance, in the UK, they actually looked at the fact that there was poor health and existing inequities in certain parts of the UK. People were vulnerable to the virus. They said that there were stark differences in the health and working age population, and they also have a free NH health service also. They found that those younger than 65 in the poorest areas of England were almost 4 times more likely to die from the COVID-19 than those in the wealthiest. So looking, I mean, inequities may exist. It could be social inequities, because they also mention that it was due to the economy that existed that also led to certain persons. And they brought into play that we have to get the social and the educational priorities also to meet any future pandemics. Poverty, we have to tackle that. So this was the July 2021 unequal pandemic fear recovery report. But right now in the UK, there's another inquiry going on. There's the COVID inquiry into the UK government. And right now, this is actually headed now. So this first one was done in 2021. And this was while the pandemic was going on. And they made certain recommendations here about housing, quality of work, and all these things. But it's not just that. They also had, now presently in the UK, there's an ongoing inquiry into the UK government. And this was, I want to read into here the, on the 22nd of August, 2020, and it's COVID-19, Derek's News. It is COVID inquiry into UK government. Should probe global response, NGO say. So even in this one, there is an official inquiry now headed by eminent retired jurist. And that inquiry that is ongoing looks at different aspects of the COVID. So they are still looking at the COVID, even though it's finished, even though people may say, well, let's forget that now. No, because they see the importance of putting up systems in place. And this new inquiry actually comes out in phases. And the interesting thing, madam, is that this present inquiry, they are looking at something like an online reporting for patients. So let us say a patient is undergoing bereavement. Let us, and I know the Minister of Health did say we have clinics for that, and that is true. We commend him. We commend him for being one of the first persons to have the COVID long clinics, for having the clinics, set up there. And this is something commendable. These are excellent things going on. But even here in the UK, they mention that there's someone called Harry Bignell, a health policy activist. He mentioned that, he wanted it expanded, not just from the UK, but to look at the UK's response, because there was cases where other countries, third world countries, claimed that they were discriminated in vaccine, getting vaccine, etc. And also, I must say, because of this, I'm suggesting that even CARICOM's response also should be netted. If you're going to have an inquiry, we should have what's going on in the CARICOM too, because it affects all of us. The vaccine, in terms of getting vaccination, in terms of how we're moving forward, in terms of a block, how we can initiate any sort of treatment coming here is something that is important. So this is something that, why I want to bring to mind, it should also look at the similar concerns that they had here. So Harry Bignell, the health policy officer, said, ultimately, it will be up to the government to adopt any recommendations that emerge from the report. And he said, the inquiry serves as a very clear purpose. We are trying to find out what happened, why, who's responsible, who's accountable, and what can be done to prevent this vast inequity from happening again. So what Senator Nakhid is wanted here, persons in the UK, persons in Australia also are asking for that. And then I must say, in Canada, there's an article from Canada News, November 14, 2020. NDP calls for independent inquiry into Canada's COVID-19 response. Again, people deserve to know, according to the article, why certain decisions were taken, what mistakes were made, and if the government acted appropriately. And in order to ensure accountability and transparency for Canadians, today the NDP Health Clinic critic Don Davis called on the federal government to launch an independent public inquiry into Canada's COVID-19 preparedness and response under the Federal Inquiries Act. So same thing, Senator Nakhid wanted, we see it globally. And again, it is really not meant to just chastise the government and bring politics, but is, in my opinion, it may serve a purpose in seeing how we can handle future pandemics. If there's a mutation, and remember, right now in China, we 2 days ago, the figures coming out of China shows that there were 35,183 new infections, madam. and 3,474 were symptomatic, and 31,709 asymptomatic. So China is now having a reemergence of this. They have now started lockdowns, and they are even having persons are now, which is strange for China, persons are objecting because they are fed up of this. So it seems even in China, we are now seeing that other things are happening. So they are now trying to build more quarantine centers, field hospitals. They, residents of Beijing have already been advised not to leave their compound, and some of which are being fenced in. So university campus has been closed out. We have shift in online classes. So COVID is not over. It's far from over. We have to realize that, and we have to prepare. And if we are going to get an inquiry to help us, I think we may have to, I may want to lean into this. Because you see, we want to, according to the Canadian article I quoted, they said the Liberals want to provide the illusion of oversight and accountability with inadequate internal reviews. And the Conservatives want to play political games with a partisan pandemic panel led by Preston Manning. So they actually saying that whatever they had before was not a true independent panel that they had before. So they were asking for more. So this is why we have to ask now, is it needed? But we had a report before. Remember, we had this report that we got in before, and the report actually showed some of the things that were lacking. And I must say, I want to come about now to say, let me talk about this report. So we had this report, the Simangal report, and those persons did an excellent job. But from the first opening paragraph of the report, it said the committee would like to note here that the time was too brief to allow a thorough assessment of COVID-19 outcomes in Trinidad and Tobago. And so the most that they could have done was a rapid assessment, which is presented. So on one hand, we have government trying to say, look, we give you a report. So this national committee, they were supposed to look over the last 2 years why 3,700 people died. But this to me was not enough time in that 3 weeks. Even the Baroness in the inquiry in UK asked for certain things to be changed in the terms of reference. And similarly, this committee that was appointed, while it had its use, I think we need a more in-depth analysis, because the first thing we had to know, the key objective was in the terms of reference, was the clinical outcomes of patients hospitalized for COVID-19 and how these patients were managed by their doctors, nurses, etc. Madam, when this report was, this committee met, they actually said they were under some sort of a time guideline. They had that time, they had a timeline, and it was difficult. They also made reference to the fact that they had now to try to look at patient files. They had to look at patient files. And when they requested initially that, you would get 100 files from each of the regions, what ended up happening in the end, they got not 100 files from each regions, but 25 patients total. 25 patients' files could never give me a true picture of what happened with almost 3,500 deaths. It cannot give us a clear picture. So at first, I must say, this report, hardworking people, they did it under constraints, but it does not give us a true picture. So therefore, I do not get comfort in this report, and I'm saying that there's no way that they could have looked at just 20. And the thing is, the 25 overall, that is 8 files they were looking at. And the 8 patient records were chosen from the, at least you got that from each of the regions. That is not really what I'm saying, not comforting to give me a clear picture of what went on. So we may need something further. We may need to bring patients forward. We may need to actually see what happened. Because remember, those reports are really written by doctors. A doctor will write a report, but would he write anything bad towards himself if they are lacking something or doing something? It's a little difficult sometimes where, to get a true picture, you speak to the patients who had their problems, or even the relatives who had somebody die there. they would give us a true picture what was lacking, what was needed. And I think in all fairness, for the persons who died, for their relatives to get some comfort, we need something more. But my problem is this. Will a commission of inquiry, I mean, those things are expensive. You know, it's expensive. And then when you come about to give a commission of inquiry, we have to appreciate. People also question sometimes that if we don't have money to solve flooding, we don't have money to solve crime, where are we going to get money to put into these commissions? Because remember, if we remember, even in this prior inquiry that is going on, initially they didn't have basic tools to do their jobs. And even in the off-commission, before, that was a thing. They didn't have their tools, their stationery to actually do it. So if we are going to have an inquiry, we have to know, could we expend that money? Because you have to remember, we look at the different inquiries, and sometimes when you look at that UDCOT inquiry, I think that was a lot of money, I can't remember the exact figure, but I remember the inquiry that I think that Professor John Off did. I think it was mentioned it cost $46.2 million. Then we had another expensive inquiry into the Jamaat al-Muslimin insurgents. And then again, that cost, I think, $31.8 million. So I want to labor the fact that do we have that money? Does the government believe in having these inquiries? Because even though this prior inquiry we have, initially the government...
Senator Deyalsingh, I will ask you to keep away from any commission of inquiry that is currently under.
I just wanted to mention, though, the inquiry that so Anthony Coleman had referred that regretted undersourcing in a past commission and inquiry when you look at CL Finance. So what I'm saying, do we really have the finance to do it? Do we have the will to do it? Is to have these inquiries, which could take a political turn, I agree, and the cost effectiveness of it is what I'm looking at. But you see, this is something we'll have to determine. If we can get an inquiry that, you know, its timeline, the cost is within our reach, I think we may have to see, should that be the way to go? Or could we have something else to get the information, which I think we really need that information, actually. So money spent, I think, is something that may be holding me back from doing this, but there are good that can come out from inquiry. And I want to quote Justice John Gomery in 2006 when he was lecturing. He said the criticisms that commissions cost too much is valid if one takes the position that a price can be put upon the search for truth and justice. But I think that it is generally believed that in a society governed by the rule of law, citizens accept that whatever the cost, it is desirable that the legal requirements of the justice system be observed. This being said, the services of top lawyers and forensic accountants are very expensive, and sometimes the total costs incurred by a commission are dismaying. So Gomery was in some sort of commission on sponsorship program and advertising in Canada. But he made that statement, and he was making that statement thinking that they should have that commission inquiry. So some commissions of inquiry, madam, I think we may not need. You could put the DPP and power the DPP in certain commissions where once he gets full staff in, and he might be able to move and solve whatever. But I just wanted to quote Paulo Kernahan's opinion in a blog he said in 2009 into the Commissioner of Inquiry into the UDCOT. And his blog said, the only real outcome that one can expect from this latest Pappy show is that lawyers will make out like bandits, taxpayers will make out like paupers, and it will be business as usual for the construction sector. So some people do not have faith in the commissions of inquiry. We know it's expensive, but we need something, and I definitely say we need something to see what went on. So my take is, could a joint select committee or different joint select committee hold we have held the regional corporations, the health corporations to come before, not the corporations, sorry, the health authorities, the RHAs, to come before us and explain what went on and shortcomings. So I'm suggesting if we cannot go that way because of expense, we may have to look at the Joint Select Committee having a forum where people could have, just like the UK now has a forum where they had Baroness Heather Hallett, the chair of the UK 19 inquiry, said she has opened up her inquiry where people online, and they have an online form, and these persons can now exercise their right. They can actually put what happened to them, put what they went through. And this is, I think, a way to go, a Joint Select Committee with ongoing online platform where persons can now say. So Baroness Heather Hallett, the chair of the committee, said the pandemic had an unprecedented impact on the health systems across the UK. The inquiry will investigate and analyze the healthcare decisions made during the pandemic, the reasons for them, and the impact. So the lessons can be learned and recommendations made for the future. During the consultation of our terms of reference, bereaved families and healthcare workers told me candidly about the devastating and prolonged impact of the pandemic on healthcare. Those most affected by the pandemic deserve answers on what happened and why, and I'm determined to get those answers. So she had opened this up now online, so persons, and I think this is where we have to go if we cannot afford it. Or we should have a patient complaints authority where patients now, not just for COVID, but if they get any sort of problem, an online platform, because people call me to complain. I say if we had that platform, it could be there, and the directors of the hospitals now could have to answer, what is this happening? So an online form was something I admired in that UK system, and I think we could try that. A Joint Select Committee could also establish a public format and can give recommendations also if we cannot go on this way. But looking at Senator Nakhid's motion, have the government really performed bad? I say no. The government did what they it was, as I say, on familiar ground. They had to act. They had to try things. Some things were not good. Some things failed. As I said, and the last was the state of emergency. And if they had that for health, I say public health, I think they could do one for national security. But that's another talk. But what I'm saying, we went through this, and I must say, this hurt me in the sense that I had a first cousin who actually died from the COVID, and he was less than 50. And this is where it hurts me, and I know they hurt. He was like a brother to me. I know they hurt people would go through. I know we were now trying to see if we could come up with certain solutions. We made certain solutions. The Minister of Health cried. He cried when he sees certain things. He was actually spying on double vendors, people line up. The Prime Minister actually had chances to chastise people and say, look, behave yourselves, come in line, behave the protocols. Those are things that, the leaders were trying to see. And I'm saying, but was all well? No, there were many shortcomings. Even the fact remains, Madam, when I saw, I think it was in the climate change conference, not this year, last year, when they had it, our Prime Minister was there without a mask, and I was most disappointed. There was a photo shoot, and why I was so is because you're telling your people, wear masks, and you had it. And I did comment on that before. And I'm saying that, thank God, he had COVID 3 times, and he has the strength to survive, and this talks about his resilience. And I'm saying, thank God, with his age, we have to be thankful that he's here with us, because others could have succumbed. And the mask mandate, people may be against masks, Madam, but be practical. Before the COVID, we had the influenza. And when swine flu and bird flu started to come, and people were getting a little worried down here, the protocols were the same. Wash your hands, wear your mask, distance yourself. And it's the same thing we have to adopt here. In fact, I was still hoping government would say for people serving food, you still wear a mask, because if you're wearing your hairnet, wear a mask. We have to see what their shortcomings. Yes, Barbados seemed to have showed us up by getting vaccines before. All these were little things happened. Yes, we got vaccines from China. People ask about the cost factor, and I think we need to know the cost factor, because transparency is something I think all governments should go. We cannot say we have a deal with China, we got a deal, and because of that, we're not going to tell you. No, that's wrong. Because you see, if we are talking about inequities throughout the world, that certain first world nations getting vaccine, hoarding vaccines, the rest of the CARICOM could say, we had a deal with China. We now got vaccines at a better deal. So in terms of transparency, I think any secret deal should not be there, and we should not be going behind to get deals. I guess our nation has to get the best deal for them, but it should not be something that other nations could look and say, well, you know, we are among the privileged few that we can get this. So we have to learn. We have to learn from what happened. We have to learn the fairness, the distribution of injection. We have to also tap in to Cuba, because Cuba has 30 years experience in biotechnology and immunology. Cuba actually produces 5 million doses of single and combined vaccines. In 1980, Cuba produced the first meningitis B shot vaccine. In 2017, the Minister of Health spoke about a lung cancer clinic. Cuba in 2017, they had Simivax for lung cancer treatment. So they are a leader, but because of geopolitics, they are now locked out. But during the COVID, they actually liaised with Venezuela, China, and Iran to produce the vaccine. So we have to go beyond that. If there's something coming, the Minister of Foreign Affairs must somehow be able to use his influence to ask other nations to support us, to support our CARICOM, but to support Cuba, because they could be something, produce vaccines for us in the future when all the other nations in the world lock us down. So we can't let geopolitics take place in health. So when I looked at Senator Nakhid, some of the standards, he said we didn't make international standards, but you know, we tried to follow the WHO guidelines, which changed at time. He made association about the monies going into the consolidated fund, and this is something, if that happened, at least we'll have to get some answers from the the government side to see what's happening. He also mentioned about I disagree with it when he said government had lack of care. I think government showed care. Government was desperate, tried all sorts of measures. And I also think that we need, COVID showed us that we need to get the normal health system up to mark. We have to do that, because if we get that up to mark, it means if any further pandemic comes on, we would already have a functional health system. And you see, all that report we get in, no, that doesn't tell us about burnout, because you have young doctors who worked in the pandemic, young nurses. They were burnt out, Madam President. The report doesn't show that. A report from a hospital giving you, if you look at a patient file, it doesn't tell you that doctor worked 36 hours, 48 hours. It doesn't tell you that. It just shows you what went on, what treatment they give, but it doesn't show you what really went on in practice, what people had to go through, what doctors and nurses, and some of the same young doctors who were working in the COVID wards, now I think they have to be looking for jobs. So we have to see how we can help those persons who are heroes among us. We also, as I mentioned, we have to make more contact with the Cuban Health Brigade, and the Cubans actually had this Health Brigade where they went into various nations helping them. They went to countries like Italy, they went to different nations where they would have helped persons right here in St. Kitts and Nevis, where they carried staff and doctors, and actually went in when they were swamped with not having enough staff, not knowing what to do. So doctor diplomacy is needed. So it's not just Minister of Health, it's the Minister of Foreign Affairs, which will have to assist us in that matter. I want to make mention that sometimes government, I think, tried their best. There was no perfect fix. Lockdowns came, different things came about, but I think dealing with our culture here, government was probably forced to do measures that some people may think were draconian. But if you are Minister of Health and you're in government and you have a population and limited beds, you would have to make these decisions that might not be popular. So what I may say, Madam, in closing, I think government had, tried their best. Yes, there were a lot of shortcomings, and probably a commission of inquiry could show those shortcomings, or probably a joint select committee with an open forum that continues could show those forthcomings, and recommendation from the Joint Select Committee can also take a part in getting us to a level where we could make recommendations that if something comes our way, if COVID decides to, the 19 virus decides to mutate and come back at us at full swing, then we would be a little more prepared. So somehow information garnered would never be wasted. Once we apply it, put it into policy, put it into ways that, you know, come what may, whatever hits us again, we'll be a little better prepared. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Gopeesingh. Yeah, go on.
Madam President, I came here prepared to speak for the 40 minutes allotted to me, but I know that you have indicated that there's a flooding problem, so I will speak for the 20 minutes that you have.
Senator Gopeesingh, let's rephrase that. I think there were discussions among the benches. So, yeah, as opposed to the presiding officer.
So I have 20 minutes to speak this afternoon on a matter that cost the lives of 4,200 plus citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And I feel very dismayed when I heard the Honorable Minister of Health, who is supposed to be responsible for the management of patients throughout Trinidad and Tobago. He said by us bringing this motion to Parliament, where we're asking for a commission of inquiry to be done so we can understand what went on during the pandemic, and that we can make some significant recommendations and changes so that the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago can benefit from any other infective type of issue that may come to Trinidad again. There are a lot of deficiencies which occurred, and this commission of inquiry will bring forward some of those weaknesses and have them corrected. So I want to support my colleague, Senator Nakhid, and of course, our party as the alternate government, and with Mrs. Kamla Prasad-Bissessar as the leader of the opposition, we have been asking for that commission of inquiry for more than a year. And I want to indicate that when we get into government, we will initiate the commission of inquiry. And I feel dismayed by the fact that the minister said we are wasting his time and the time of Parliament when we are asking the government to account for the stewardship when 4,200 lives have been lost. That is the type of arrogance that we do not need in this country. That is the type of arrogance that you see being perpetrated upon the people by the government of Trinidad and Tobago at this moment. That is highly unacceptable, highly unacceptable. I want to clear up some of the issues which Minister Deyalsingh spoke about. He always comes, for the last 3 or 4 years, I've heard him speak about maternal mortality and neonatal mortality and this mortality and that mortality. And he cannot justify with any scientific evidence and any statistical evidence where his figures came from. We look for that all throughout the Central Statistical Office, and we look for that by the doctor now who is spearheading the women's health issues, and we cannot find the information. So when he spouts out, we have reduced maternal mortality and we reduce neonatal mortality and infant mortality, he is not speaking the accurate and not giving the accurate figures, because he has no statistical area where he can go into and provide those figures. When we look for it, he must tell this country where he gets his statistical figures from, because they are not available. Central Statistical Office, I asked the deputy head of Central Statistical Office to give me the information on the national figures, and he could not have given me. So where's Minister Deyalsingh fabricating this information about a fall in maternal mortality and a fall in the death rate?
Please.
All right. Senator Gopeesingh, remember not to personalize the contribution, please. As I had indicated to Senator Nakhid as well, I had made the same point about what the motion is about and not who. Okay?
You very loudly, but I'm just responding to what the Honourable Minister of Health indicated.
All right, but Senator Gopeesingh, you know, when I give guidance, you know, the next word out of a senator's mouth shouldn't be but. Just take the guidance and move along, please, please.
Sure, I take your guidance, Madam President. Now, I asked one of my colleagues, Dr. Lakram Bodo, who had been spearheading this work on maternal mortality, because I want to put an end to Minister Deyalsingh's statement. The Kamla Prasad Bisesa government commissioned a review of the maternity services in 2011, following the death of a mother at San Fernando General Hospital. And the committee then included then Independent Senator Victor Wheeler, Ade Sojusingh, who is now the Director of Women's Health, Professor Samuel Ramsawak, now Senator Dillon Remy, and it was chaired by Dr. Lakram Bodo. That was in 2011. They visited all hospitals and reviewed services, and they came back reporting with recommendations submitted to the Ministry of Health in 2013. The implementation started under the People's Partnership government, and the report created a position of Director of Women's Health with Dr. Ade Sojusingh in the post. So the current reduction in maternal and neonatal mortality, which he speaks about from 3-4 years now, is due to the vision and early action of the People's Partnership government and the work of Prime Minister then, Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa. Now you have a consultant attending every C-section, a registrar on the labor ward for 24 hours of the day. Started work, and then we started work on the labor ward in 2015 at the San Fernando General Hospital. Minister Deyalsingh, after 5 years, has not completed one piece of work on that. So everything that he speaks about, they're built on the platform of the People's Partnership government. Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa left him, and he now wants what we left him, and he now wants to take credit for it. So, Madam President, I put an end to that. He can't provide the statistics. He speaks about sunlight and sunlight every day. That is, the UNC spoke about sunlight. But there are 5 research papers that I want to direct him to show that there are major benefits from, and I want to refer him to 5 scientific papers and studies done. SciTechDaily.com experiments show sunlight destroys COVID virus 8 times faster than scientists thought. ScienceAlert.com, sunlight inactivates SARS-CoV-2 a lot faster than predicted, and we need to work out why. That is the finding. Next research work done and published, sunlight destroys coronavirus quickly. Next research work published, simulated sunlight kills SARS-CoV-2 on surfaces in 7 to 14 minutes. So when statements are made, don't take it lightly. Go and do your research for yourself, and then you will understand why people make some statements. So the science proves that, and he cannot disprove the science. I want to put an end to this thing about the hydroxychloroquine as well. When Mrs. Prasad Bisesa, as leader of the opposition, approached Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley about our decision to help At that time, there was no drug that was found possible to be working on the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And at the time, there were studies being done on the hydroxychloroquine. We brought it to the attention of the Prime Minister. We never recommended hydroxychloroquine. We said, are you aware that there's research now being done on hydroxychloroquine? We never recommended hydroxychloroquine, so I put an end to that. He said the government never had support of the UNC on the vaccine issue. I wonder if he was aware then, he was sitting right there, when the Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley, said at one of his conferences, you must listen to what Dr. Gopeesingh advises. Dr. Gopeesingh is a professional with great experience. Listen to what he said. This is the word of Dr. Keith Rowley, Prime Minister. He said, Dr. Gopeesingh says, take the Sinopharm vaccine. So how could Minister Deyalsingh come today and make a statement that the United National Congress never supported the government on the vaccine issue? We supported them. We told the people, take the Sinopharm vaccine because people were hesitant to take it. And he said, we sabotaged the vaccination program. How could we sabotage the vaccination program when we gave advice to the people of Trinidad and Tobago? It is because of their weakness and their inability to do things that the vaccination rate stopped at 56%. If they had educated the population pretty early and brought confidence to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, they would have gone on to have a higher percentage of vaccination in the country, where 56% only are now vaccinated. And I advise on the platform, on this tonight, I advise all the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago who never took the vaccine before, please avail yourselves of the vaccine because it will help you and it will prevent more morbidity. So, but we don't have the vaccines that they can get now. So even though that 44% want vaccines, they don't have the vaccines in Trinidad. So these are some of the things that I wanted to respond to Minister Deyalsingh in his presentation. Time is of the essence, but I want to therefore go straight into the report of the committee appointed to investigate the factors contributing to clinical outcomes of COVID-19 patients in Trinidad and Tobago. And Minister Deyalsingh goes on to give inaccurate statements in terms of he gave one area where the report said a positive thing. But I want to read some of the findings of the Simongal report. And we never said that the Simongal report will be X and Y. The Prime Minister was giving the Simongal Commission 3 weeks to the research. So we said that nothing will come out of that. If you give them 3 weeks, it will be a puppy show. What can they achieve in 3 weeks? You can get any statistical information, you could get any information and come to conclusions when you're given 3 weeks. Then hesitatingly, the Prime Minister said, oh, 3 months then. But the findings suggest that they needed more time. So, but here what some of the findings are. The levels of staffing in a mass response as a global pandemic, staff shortages were common. There were complaints of every level about the shortage of staff. These levels range from executive management to doctors and nurses to orderlies and patients. Is this what they don't want to come out when we do the commission inquiry? Any mention of or short staffing must also mention treatment of staff. At some sites, young doctors had to sleep on mattresses on the floor. Often this involved 3 or 4 doctors sleeping in the same room. Male doctors and female doctors had to share the same sleeping accommodation. This raises serious concerns about privacy. There were also security concerns. Some doctors complained that the door of their room could not be locked. This is a worrisome given the current state of crime in the country. This is a Simongal report. Locum contracts. There were frequent complaints about very short locum contracts of 1 month to 3 months duration. These short contracts create great uncertainty and depress the morale of young doctors who are exposing themselves to great risk. And these are findings of the Simongal report. The Simongal report had the committee of men who are very experienced and of professionalism. And these are their findings. And this is what we want the government to take heed of. Since February, this report was published. Now it's November, 9 months. They made 19 recommendations, and this government has not even taken one of these recommendations to implement it. And this is a government for the people. After losing 4,200 lives, and then he speaks about the cases that Ramlogan and Jayanti Lashmidi are doing. The people are aggrieved, and they're going to get some response from the government. Why did my family die? Under what circumstance did my family die? And this is why you're having hundreds of these type of matters being asked now, because the people are suffering emotionally and mentally. Families are left without father and mother. Children are left without father and mother. So they're taking up the cases now. They want the government to account for the incompetence and mismanagement during this COVID time. Meals. Some staff complained about problems getting meals, especially after long hours in the hot zone. Nurses. There was a universal complaint of severe understaffing among nurses. Nurses complained of having to work long hours in personal protective equipment. What a shame! Nurses have to work in the same personal protective equipment for 12 hours, sometimes 24 hours, often without a break to drink water or go to the washroom. They reported that they had no lift and to turn patients because of the shortage of attendants and orderlies. Obese patients were very difficult to turn. You mean to say a government cannot employ many more men to help to turn patients in an ICU, orderlies? And this is the type of thing that the minister is patting himself on the shoulder and say, we did a good job. So that's why now he has to come and beg us to support him. Some nurses spoke of the psychological pressure they felt when confronted with many deaths in a day. They also spoke of the extreme mental stress they faced whenever one of their colleagues died from COVID. Nurses' families died, nurses died, police officers died. One nurse, who is a mother of 2 young children, made a plea for daycare centers near the hospital. She pointed out that she often finished her shift late because of the very ill patients. Having her children nearby would ease her anxiety. 2 very experienced, 2 very senior nurses were consulted by the committee. They mentioned that under normal circumstances, the nurse-to-patient ratio would be 1 nurse to 2 patients in ICU. In the ICU, there was 1 nurse to 6 patients, 1 nurse to 8 patients in an ICU, where people are intubated and you have to get the breathing pressures and so on. What a shame and disgrace. And this is what he called management. This is why we want a commission of inquiry to unearth the incompetence and the mismanagement. Hundreds of people lost their lives because of mismanagement by this government, by this minister and his advisory team. Our national policy on intensive care services recommends 1 nurse to 1 patient in ICU. The recommendation is 1 nurse to 1 patient in ICU. We have 1 nurse to 8 patients. These very senior nurses also said that on the ward, the ratio would be 1 registered nurse to 4 to 6 patients. That's the norm. But it showed that there was 1 nurse to 24 patients, 1 nurse to 30 patients, 1 nurse in the tents to 60 patients. What a national disgrace. People suffered in the tents. They were without oxygen. They were without anything to lie down on. They had no water. They had to be begging for water. They stayed in these tents for 6 days and waiting on the result of a PCR. That's why Senator Nakhid said that he was resistant, the minister was resistant to having this quick antigen testing. He said he will lock up anybody who brings in this quick antigen testing. If the quick antigen testing was available, somebody would not have to wait in the tent for six days to get a result while they become more sick and while they're suffering and then eventually die in the tents. The report goes on to say, in Trinidad and Tobago, we often told of 1 ICU nurse nursing 6 ICU ventilated patients. We also receive reports about 1 registered nurse on the ward nursing 20 to 30 patients. What a shame. And 1,300 nurses were unemployed and waiting for jobs. and you brought on the junior doctors who just finished the internship, and you say you employ 197 nurses, doctors. Madam
Senator
President, how
Gopeesingh,
much time I have?
you have 1 more minute.
1 more minute. So I intend to take this to the people and let the people hear. I have 20 minutes to put in my case. I would have liked more, but the circumstances prevent me from moving on. But this is just a semblance of what we intend to unearth: the mismanagement, the callousness, the insensitivity, and the gross incompetence of this government in causing the loss of hundreds of patients' lives, many which were preventable. The beginning is now started, and we say to the people, elect us into government, and we will unearth the irregularities which came into this mismanagement of the COVID. Don't hide behind the fact that COVID is a pandemic across the world. You have a duty and a responsibility to your people to manage it appropriately and correctly, which you did not do. You failed to do. Madam President, thank you very much.
Acting Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move that this Senate do now adjourn to a date to be fixed.
Before I put the question on the adjournment, may I commend the Acting Leader of Government Business, the Acting Leader of Opposition Business, and the Coordinator for the agreement at which they arrived. And may I just say that that was done in the tradition of the highest parliamentary practice. So, Honourable Senators, the question is that this Senate do now adjourn to a date to be fixed. Those in favour say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This Senate now stands adjourned to a date to be fixed.